Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that gives you a peek inside the minds of some truly inspirational teachers. This week, I am thrilled to welcome both Victoria Morris and Neil Almond onto the podcast to talk about all things primary geography. Between the two of them, they've forgotten more about geography education than I'll ever know, and they've been kind enough to spend around 4 hours recording not just one, but the next 2 episodes for us, and I know you're going to absolutely love what they have to say. But as always, before we get started, I'd like to ask a small favour. Because one of the ways to help ensure this podcast reaches the many teachers not using social media is to leave a review wherever you're listening. It should only take a second, and it would mean so much to know these interviews were reaching those they can help. One reviewer will be chosen at random during episode 8 of season 2 and receive signed copies of Thinking Deeply About Primary Mathematics, The Art and Science of Primary Reading, 100 Ideas for Primary Teachers Maths, and the Research Ed Guide to Curriculum featuring a chapter from Neil Almond. So without further ado, let's spend some time thinking deeply about primary geography education. Excellent. So in this episode, we're joined by Victoria and Neil, and they're going to share their expertise in relation to geography at the primary phase of schooling. Neil, we've already got to know you a little bit in previous episodes. So Victoria, I think we'll start with your numbers. And my first question is, years as a teacher?
16.
Last year group taught?
5.
Most important year group?
For me, 6. That's the most important year group that I think in my career. That's the year group that really helped me to develop the most professionally. Not that I'm saying that year 6 is the most important year group in primary school.
Contributions to geography books curated by Mark Enser? And tweets?
13.8 thousand.
Wow, that's impressive. I think so far you may be the most experienced teacher to visit the podcast. Andy Keegan was on, and he was 15 years, so you've just edged him out so far. So that's a good record to hold. If we could circle back to,
can I also say that Victoria, I think, is the best person to have stayed in the in numbers kind of confinement that you put on these questions that no one else actually pays attention to.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I know people often talk about how often people deviate from the rules of the game. So I think that was really well played. And in fact, I think if we circle back to geography books, do you want to tell us a little bit more about, I think, is it Powerful Geography that you sort of contributed to?
Yeah, got it here. Yeah. So I wrote a case study about how to plan a country study for primary geography for the primary curriculum. And it was based on the blog that I wrote about Italy as a country study. And I basically described how did I choose the content that I was going to put in the country study? And when I did our school's geography curriculum, how did I decide what content to include in which of the country studies? Excellent.
I reckon that's a peep inside your head. I would have really loved that whenever I was teaching geography all the time. Because I reckon I didn't do it justice. And I think I think people can really benefit from the opportunity to see your thought processes. That sounds excellent. So you're a year 5 teacher at the moment and a specialist in curriculum design and the humanities. Tell us about your journey and how you got here.
When I started teaching, I think some schools were on the QCA, just taught everything exactly as it was on the QCA schemes of work. And then some schools were on creative curriculum. And I kind of taught in both schools in teaching practices and early schools I taught in. But the creative curriculum was you get given a list of what do you need to teach in this year group, go. You might get a list of, I think my first school I got given a list of topic titles and that was it for the whole year, and I just had to plan it all myself. So, it was hard at the time trying to decide what do you include and how to do it and everything, because it was just starting from scratch. There wasn't any planning to go on, but I think that experience really helped me. That I think that's how I got really familiar with the national curriculum, because that to me that was the way of deciding what do you do. That's how to narrow it down, is to keep going back to the national curriculum. And I taught in schools that were like that right up until I moved to St Matthias in 2018, I'd always taught by doing creative curriculum topics and just knowing what I had to cover in the year and deciding how to link things together. And so like subject leadership wise, I actually started off doing RE, and I did RE and music for quite a while, and I taught from years 2 to 4. And then I moved schools and got the opportunity to move up to year 5, and I knew I was taking them to year 6 when I started year 5. So that was great because I knew that I had 2 years to get them ready for SATs. And so I've done quite a lot of years in upper key stage 2 now. And I was maths lead as well for 5 years, I think. And then I also became curriculum lead at that school and started looking at curriculum across the school rather than just focusing on my own year group. So I've led quite a lot of different things now. I can just get into any different subject really. So I was never really an expert on geography or history, although I did do history A level. I gave up geography in year 9. So I was never a particular expert on geography until Claire said to me that I could start working on St Matthias's geography and history curriculum. And then I just had to really I improve my subject knowledge loads at that point so that I could get that right. So that's when I got much more into the humanities side of things.
And so how many years had you been teaching when you got that chance to dive into geography in depth?
13.
13. So you'd established your craft pretty considerably, because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about I often talk about how we should give our new teachers as much as possible, and then over time, then they have that, increasingly more freedom. And then I was listening, thinking, well, actually, hold on, you've made a really good point about the fact that you learned by doing it. You learned by getting under the skin of it. But I think they probably balance off quite well with each other, and that's really interesting. And actually, yeah, it sounds like something if I hadn't gone down the maths route as much, I definitely think history and geography would be something that I would like to spend a lot of time. Because like yourself, my geography knowledge isn't great, but I also did history at level, and I find that fascinating. So I think, Neil, if we can bring you in now, with our focus on geography in this episode. So your combined expertise in curriculum design takes some beating, and you're both particularly passionate about quality geography education in primary. Why is geography important at our phase of schooling?
Who wants to go first? Victoria?
I think the first thing I thought of for that was awe and wonder. Just because the more you understand the world around you, the more you can enjoy it. So I think at the early stages, that's really important, the amazement that children get when they've been taught the geography of urban and rural environments, and then you take them to a rural environment and they can recognise all these things that they're seeing. I think that's the first thing that I thought of.
For me, it comes from a document I'm going to reference quite a lot in this podcast, and it really is a document that most teachers should be familiar with, and that's the national curriculum. Because what tends to happen as teachers do is that they look at what do I teach in Key Stage 1? What do I teach in Key Stage 2? And they tend not to read the purpose, but there's always a little paragraph about what the purpose or the attainment of this subject is. And I think for me, when I read that, looking at these questions, and I read that essay, I think it was just perfect. Inspire pupils a curiosity and fascination about the world. Equip pupils with the knowledge of diverse places, people, resources, natural and human environments. Understand a deep understanding of Earth's key physical human processes. I mean, it's about that understanding of why the world as it is the way that it is now, and what's not exciting to know about that. And we can talk about powerful knowledge and children's inheritance. I do fundamentally believe it's children's inheritance to understand why the world that they currently live in is the way that it is. I think children are quite egotistical at primary school age. It's all about me, probably quite rightly so. So I think geography is kind of a nice way to take them out of that and to understand the world as it is when they don't perceive themselves to be the center of it.
Strong answers. I think perhaps the fact that we live in such a multicultural society, and I think it's increasingly multicultural, increasingly international, I can totally see how that would be of benefit to pupils in that scenario, because you're absolutely right. It is very much, you start at the center of the world, and then the older you get, the more you realize that you're not. Excellent. Is there anything you want to add to that, Victoria? Or
I think it's important to get it right at primary level, because for the preparation for secondary as well. But obviously that's the same for every subject, but it's important that they really know geography, that they're not just doing some things, learning some things about other countries, but they've really had like that solid geographical knowledge, and like really focusing on what geography is as a discipline to prepare them for the secondary geography.
And if you guys could condense your approach into a set of guiding principles, what would they be?
First of all, funnily enough, read the national curriculum for geography, read what it actually says in there. I was briefly flicking through Mark Enser's book, and it's pretty light on content, and some of the geographical statements in there are quite wordy. And like Victoria, I stopped doing geography in year 9. I dropped it as soon as I could. It wasn't a particular one. I liked it, but I didn't enjoy it. And some of the things that that we expect Key Stage 2 to learn, you look at that and you think, what on earth am I meant to be doing? Like there's land use or something like that. I can't remember the objective off the top of my head, but there's one there that's just, no one, unless you've recently done it, probably taken it up to A level, or you've taken it up to, or you're one of those lucky people that have a geography lead who actually has a degree or an A level in geography, is really going to truly be able to understand. So I think for me, it's read the national curriculum and understand what that objective is saying. Decide on what your outcome is going to be from teaching that objective. Where appropriate, I would then link to Peter Jackson, who's a geographer. He wrote in a paper, and again, Mark Enser references it plenty, the key concepts of geography. So that's linking it to space and place, scale and connection, proximity and place, and relational thinking. And once you can kind of map that out, then I think it's time to read up on your subject knowledge and find everything and anything that you can. Once you've improved your own subject knowledge, you can begin to roughly map out a sequence. You'll understand what the children's their endpoint is, so you can plot it backwards. From there, you can then draw in substantive concepts like environment, trade, weather, climate, resources, those things that can help us link back to previous year groups or can link us to other subjects. Then find those links to those areas of that curriculum. And once you've done all that, you can then write what I call version 1.0, because the minute you leave it, you come back to it, you think, why did I include that? This is more important, or maybe I can take that out. So I think it's really important when you're kind of doing these things. It's never a finished, complete process, even if you've had your curriculum in place for 2 or 3 years. The world of geography is ever changing, so it needs that constant revisiting as well.
Good answer. I think the only thing that I want to add to that is, I think it is the case in other subjects, but even more so in geography, there's a lot of stuff that children need to remember, that you can't just teach them once and then expect them to know it. And obviously you wouldn't do that with anything. You'd have to return to it. But there's some things in geography that just work so much better little and often, and that you need to really look at when you're like designing the curriculum, really thinking about like what works best as an in-depth unit and what is better, like bringing it out and doing it the little and often stuff, and just keep dropping it in the regular practice. Because if you just teach one lesson on these are the 5 continents and then don't do it again, obviously the children aren't going to remember what the 5 continents are. If you do one lesson in year 1, they're not going to know what they are by the end of year 2. So I think there's certain objectives in geography that just work so much better if you look at how can you keep revisiting it more often than you would by just doing a little bit of retrieval at the beginning of the next unit or the beginning of the lesson. And how you break down some of the objectives in geography as well, just looking at some of them are really big, and does it work better to actually teach a bit of it in each year group rather than putting one block in a certain year group? And so I think just really looking at what does each of the objectives in a national curriculum encompass, and then what's the best way of achieving that across the key stage so that children actually know it by the end of the key stage the best that they can. It's not just a case of, okay, we'll take that objective and put it in that year group. It's really looking at each objective on its own and thinking about what's the best way of achieving that across the whole key stage.
What are some of the factors that influence your decision-making process? And I suppose that's to both of you, because obviously, Neil, you're talking about refining it over time. And so that's bringing to mind thoughts of, what's hinterland and what's essential in our planning. So what are the sort of the factors that influence your decision-making process?
The experience of just having taught a lot of I've probably taught, there's some things that are now in upper key stage 2 that are in year 6 that I've never taught before, but I've taught nearly all of these things at some point. And I think it's just experience of having children come to me and what they knew and didn't know, and I'm thinking, okay, but if we'd done it like this, maybe they would have known that. And so a lot of it's just drawn from experience of observing children and what they can remember and what they can't, and what worked in different year groups.
Nice, that makes a lot of sense. What about you, Neil?
Victoria's hit the nail on the head there. It's just understanding, once you see your curriculum as a whole, not just your geography curriculum, but the curriculum of all the subjects that you have, and you kind of get that bigger picture overview, you can kind of get a sense of actually maybe this unit better belongs there, or there's such a clear link here between what we're talking about in the book that we're looking at for English, and we draw on little bits of history or perhaps science. It makes sense to have some geography maybe before it to act as a foundation, or maybe possibly, if they're getting these ideas in literacy, they're getting these ideas in the science, maybe it's best for geography to come next year. So then those two subjects act as a trampoline, as it were, for getting onto that other part of that geography. So I think it's once you understand your curriculum as a whole, that's when you can kind of really understand where the best things fit together and start playing around. And I think anyone who wants to do that, they need to be able to prove to me that they have seen that bigger picture, that they can see, actually we think, and I think it's worth trying these things out. I know, for example, as I'm sure we'll get into in the history, Victoria and I will argue for days and days about the position of the Stone Age to Iron Age, and the only way that you'd be able to work, to find out is, well, we'll try it both ways and see what happens.
Nice. That makes a lot of sense. It's almost that narrative run through the curriculum and how it ties in with
absolutely
the whole story. Yeah, that just listen to you guys. Things are making so much sense. And I really wish I could teach geography tomorrow, just to try it out. So I suppose a pretty difficult question next. In your opinion, what is the single most important aspect of geography education?
I think for me, it's the part that was a revelation to me when I started learning more about geography and improving my subject knowledge it's the bit in that preamble to the national curriculum. Let me check the exact wording, where it says about the interaction between physical and human processes. I didn't know that was the key to geography. I think if I'd actually understood that when I was at school, I might have enjoyed it more, that it's like, how does everything link together? And I think maybe that's why I like it, because I always like looking for links between things. It's like every bit of it has to, it's not lots of different things in isolation, which was how I learned it at secondary school. It's actually everything sort of working together and all the processes fitting together. And I think when you plan it, you have to try and plan it so that children understand that.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Recently I've been reading Prisoners of Geography, and it talks about geopolitical relationships based on the physical features. And I think that's almost what you're describing. That's what I'm definitely thinking about. Is, for me, it was almost the first time I realized, just how important that physical geography is to how we behave as humans. That's a great point. And what about yourself, Neil?
Echoing kind of what Victoria said, but also going back to what I said in an earlier question. It really is kind of getting children to understand how it is that the world looks like it does today, and looking back at what has happened and how we can kind of use that as a means to understanding what the world might look like tomorrow and what that means for us right now. And obviously in that comes the interrelatedness of the physical and the human geography, and how all of those and the physical processes and how all those come together. And as I say, I'm going to be quoting so much Brunowski on The Ascent of Man, because I think as a framework, it's wonderful just to understand, the purpose of geography is to understand how it is that, we started off in Africa. How did we, as a species, come to be in every part of the, 6 of the 7 continents? And every now and then we throw some scientists onto the 7th one just to learn more about it. So, I think that'd be my answer.
Nice, excellent. No easy task answering that one either, especially when you love geography as much as you guys do. And then I suppose moving on to schools, what is it the schools who provide a stellar geography offering do so well?
What they do, and it's a tricky question to not kind of give too much answers away for the next one, because you can almost compare them as, stellar geography is what poor geography is. So I think they really get the mix of kind of thematic studies versus regional studies. They get that balance well. So they may look at some physical processes in depth through thematic studies. So they might look at the water cycle, or how rivers work as a thematic study. And then when they go to a regional study to look at South America, North America, whatever they choose to study, they're then using what they learned in that thematic study as a hook into their regional study, or at least applying what they've learned. So actually, we've learned about the water cycle. How can we use that to tell us about flooding in the Amazon compared to flooding in the UK? So they can draw on the idea that the more trees we plant, the more water they're going to absorb. Therefore, where we're cutting down forests in the Amazon, perhaps flooding is increasing, but hundreds of years ago, the flooding wasn't much of an issue. And they can make those connections there between the floods that we seem to be getting on a semi-regular basis over here as well. I would also argue that, and Victoria is definitely the person to talk about this, but the examples that they choose are really carefully curated. So I won't go on to that because I know Victoria is the person to absolutely talk about that. And again, going back to what Victoria says as well, actually, the kids know the basics and they know the basics well. Predominantly upper key stage 2 teacher, and it is infuriating when you get children in year 5 and year 6 who still don't know the capitals of the 4 countries of the United Kingdom, and they still actually don't know what those 4 countries in the United Kingdom are. So before we can, get to anything more meaty than that, and I think perhaps maybe somewhat controversially, I think there is a bit of place in the geography curriculum for the quote unquote pub quiz kind of knowledge about these things. But if you're getting children who are 9, 10, 11 years old who still don't understand that, they live in a city called London, and that city is in a is in a country called England, and England is part of a United Kingdom which is made up of 4 countries, and that country is in the continent of Europe, and Europe is part of 6 other continents, and then those are the continents are the land masses that make up the world. Then you're onto a losing stride already. So those children who come up knowing all of that stuff, I think it has to be stellar primary geography. And I'd also make sure as well, and I've certainly been guilty about this when I've been teaching geography, is the fieldwork aspect. I think it's one that can quite easily fall by the wayside. And again, I think that probably is that because our confidence in actually thinking about what does good geographical fieldwork looks like. I'm that's a question that I still ask myself and research quite often, time to time, because I can't say for certain right now, what it is and what that should look like at the primary school. So I think if there are teachers out there who are getting that side right, then all power to them. And I think you've got to say that that's, strong geography at the primary level.
What's your go-to at the minute for fieldwork? And obviously not necessarily needing to give me the idea. How do you envisage at this moment? Given that it might change over time.
I think it's being realistic with what you can do at the places where you are now. So I think, at its basic level, it could just be looking at the levels of traffic at, 9 o'clock where it's typical rush hour, then again, maybe at 12 o'clock, because, luckily we have the kids all day, so we can do those kinds of things. And then again at 3 o'clock, and you can do, the data handling side of it from the maths and all of that kind of thing. And so it kind of gives you that understanding of the wider school community. Obviously, as you go through to year 6, you want that to progressively get more difficult and become a bit more sophisticated. And what that might actually look like, hand on heart, I have to tell you, I'm not entirely sure just yet. I'm hoping Victoria's going to come in and save me on that.
No, I think probably not coming from a geography background, actually the fieldwork and how to incorporate fieldwork into teaching geography, that's probably the thing that I most need to work on still as well. I think a big part of it is knowing the local area around the school really well. And it probably took me a long time to actually realise how important that was in curriculum design. Like, you really have to know the local area really well when you're deciding the curriculum, and that's the same in history as well, because if you know that, then you'll know opportunities for trips like ones that you could run yourself, but also there's some really great trips around here where other people who know loads about that particular river or whatever it is can do that expert. So I think for me, you can do some simple things yourself at school, and then drawing on the experts with trips for field work is really important as well, because I'm not going to be able to have the equipment and the level of knowledge about the physical features and things that I think some people on a trips. And there's really good, I'm thinking of some particular rivers ones that I know about around here that are really, really good. Obviously we can't do trips at the moment, but I think when we can go back to doing trips, it's having a really good knowledge of the different trips that you can do locally to supplement what you can do in school yourself.
Yeah, I only ask because I'm drawn a blank whenever you say excellent fieldwork. So it's not trying to catch anyone out. It's genuinely just very interested to learn as much as possible. So is there anything you think, Victoria, that schools providing a stellar geography offering do really well?
I'm trying to think back to what Neil said. I want to answer something he was saying then.
It's about the choosing examples, so that the examples that you might use, the case studies that you might use, they're carefully curated.
Yeah, and you were saying about the example of knowing the UK and how and what's a city and country and continent and all of those things. And I was thinking when you were saying that, I think really understanding the small steps that children go through and learning and understanding those concepts is a big thing, because I know that I've still got children in year 5 who don't understand the difference between a city and a country, and I've done it so much and they still just don't get it. And I can ask for a city and they'll say Africa, and I'm like, but I don't. It takes a long time to understand what those things are, and I think it's the unconscious expert, isn't it, that as adults we don't realise, we know what those things are. You don't realise how much it actually takes for children to really develop that understanding. And so really thinking about the small steps that they need to go through to learn city, continent, country, and just to understand the difference, and having so many examples. And I think just having a really wide variety of examples is really important. And choosing, what am I going to say about choosing the examples carefully? I think it depends on, it's probably better to read my blog on this than for me to try and badly say what I've already written down, but thinking about the makeup of the school and like the backgrounds of the children that you have and the area that the school's in, and also just what other countries come up in the curriculum in and not just in geography as well, and just really looking at which ones will help you to teach the other elements of the national curriculum. Because if you're looking at, what am I trying to say? I'm sure I've written something about this recently as well, and I'm not explaining it properly, but it's like, actually, maybe I did write it in Powerful Geography. I think I actually did write this in there. But it's like, if you're knowing what physical and human features the children have already learned about, and thinking, well, which countries and which features of those countries are going to be helpful to apply the knowledge that they've already got. So like, if you've taught rivers already, then obviously when you do a country study, you're going to look a bit more in depth at the features of the rivers in that country. Or like, you might know that you've taught rivers already, but then you're coming to mountains next. And so you might just drop in a few things about mountains to that country study to prepare them for when you do more about mountains. And then you can remind them, I remember when we learnt about Italy and we learnt about the Alps, and they've already got some, like, it's primed them for it. So I think there's a lot of detail in the design, and in geography probably maybe more so than history actually, but I think there's a lot of details and a lot of little bits that you can get in and link to other areas of the curriculum. So it's really having that in-depth knowledge of the whole school's curriculum.
So that's almost harking back to one of your earlier responses about little and often, and tying those different pieces together. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, I know of schools that have asked you guys to come in and work with their school leaders. I think that can be quite a powerful model, because your schools have released you for maybe about half a day, and then you've gone and given your sort of massive big picture sort of experience, and then they can make it really relevant for them, So I think if anyone's in the position where they're thinking, oh, I'd really love to do this, there's bound to be people in each part of the, what have we got, 50 odd counties in England, and beyond, who are more than willing to give up their time, because, I know that when people are passionate about stuff, especially in primary, they're always more than willing to share. So that makes a lot of sense. I'm also quite, in terms of the pub quizzes, Neil, it's during dinner time, whenever there's almost like a gap and the boys are starting to get restless at the table, I'll give them a UK quiz to fill the gaps.
Lovely, love it.
Yeah, I'll give them a quiz, because I think if they go to school, like you say, knowing those fundamentals, it's almost the place value, and then from everything else can happen from their account.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think
that's a lovely way to think about it. It's a lovely little analogy there.
I've got a list on the wall next to my desk in my classroom of things that need revision, and like the countries and capitals of the UK is one of them. And it's not just geography, like loads of different things, maths, all sorts of different things, but just stuff that they tend to forget, like the number of days in each month rhyme, a list of things like that. And whenever there's a spare moment, because I will forget these little things, so I've just got them all written down there. If we've got 5 minutes, I just pick stuff off the list and give them a quiz from that.
I'm going to be stealing that. That's a great idea.
Yeah, you spend so much time on the rhyme that actually you might as well just go and check the calendar. And I suppose the next one, you may already have answered it, like you say, Neil, but are there any pitfalls that those schools who sort of struggle to provide a decent standard of geography fall into, that people listening should, maybe perhaps try to avoid?
Not actually teaching geography in geography lessons. So it ends up being too literacy based. Or that people think that it's geography if it's about a country, so they teach some facts about a country and think they've done the geography. It's making sure it all has to go back to being rooted in the national curriculum. And also, when deciding what geography to teach, it's like to avoid deciding based on what will link with the other things that you're teaching that term. It's not looking at, sometimes it'll be, okay, we're teaching this book, so the geography needs to link to this book. And sometimes that's good, and like making links to books is fine, but if that's the only thing you're using to decide the order you're teaching the geography, and you don't necessarily get the logical sequencing of knowledge in geography to help the children to actually understand it. So I think it's having the decision-making process for geography actually based on the geography and understanding the geographical concepts you want to teach. And yes, linking to other things and bringing in reading and writing is good, but the driver should be the geography when you're planning the geography. And I think also really looking in depth at the national curriculum and making sure, are you actually teaching all of it? Because I think because there's often demands on time, that when people are planning, if you're doing it quickly, you'll look and you'll think, oh yes, we're covering that objective, without really maybe thinking in as much depth about what are all the elements in that objective, that it's not just. And sometimes I don't think the national curriculum, like the way it's laid out, helps sometimes, because there'll be 2 or 3 things actually encompassed in one objective, and it sort of looks on the surface like one thing, and it's not actually. There's 3 different things in that objective, and you probably need to teach them separately. So I think it's really having that thorough understanding of the national curriculum, like Neil was saying earlier, and just making sure everything goes back to that, rather than, okay, we're going to write something about a river, but have they actually learned all the features of the rivers first to base the writing on? That's probably the main things.
What would your ideal time allotment in a week be for geography?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm not very good on timetables.
I think that's the wrong question. I think that's a lot where, and this is something I've been thinking quite deeply about quite recently with some colleagues as well. I think the idea of giving something a set amount of time is the wrong way to go about it. And actually we should be thinking about, what do I want to teach them? And how much time do I need to accomplish that? If I know I've got, I think this is the problem with, we often, for probably arbitrary reasons, just to make life easy for ourselves, every half term we have to start a new topic. Well, why? If I'm teaching them something that needs 10 weeks of instruction, and I've only been given an hour a week, then surely I should be able to use those 10 weeks. If something like with Victoria, like if you're in Key Stage 1, you could pretty much get away potentially without having massive hour blocks of geography, and just do 10 minutes little and often every day. So I think one thing that perhaps schools can do to kind of create some powerful geography, and not just in geography, but in other subjects as well, is stop looking at time as being this arbitrary, and stop using the measurements of half terms as a measurement of the time that we have, and start looking at the content that we actually have and how much time we think we need to cover that. Because you should be ensuring that if your curriculum plans are secure enough, you'll know you're getting the coverage. So for me, it seems I think I understand why people do it, because it fits nicely and there's that sense of comfort. But I also think we put ourselves in a little box by kind of doing it that way.
Nice. I love that answer.
Basically why I don't like timetables. That is the reason I don't like timetables. I want to look at everything I need to teach, and then I will decide how long is it going to take and what order is the best order to do it in. And I don't want a timetable to tell me, teach this for an hour here, because that's not necessarily the best way of doing it. So
exactly. When you look back at Bloom's and Guskey and a proper mastery model of schooling, I think the timetable is one of the main reasons why that's stopped that model from being incorporated into more primary schools. And I think primary schools, because we have the same students for the whole year, we're more likely to be able to actually enact something like that mastery model of schooling. But because we stick with these arbitrary time limits on content, it makes it 10 times more difficult to do.
Yeah, I absolutely love that answer. I'm experiencing a thunderbolt right before your eyes here. The scales are falling from my eyes. Because obviously banging on about an hour isn't the unit of time for a lesson, and you guys have just extrapolated that, and actually it makes so much sense. That could possibly be the most important thing that gets sort of explained in this episode, I reckon. Yeah, I'm 100% with you on that.
Yeah, I was mirror exactly kind of all the things that Victoria says. That my notes literally say, you get lost in the topic name because you've been given a weird topic title, and so therefore your geography comes from the topic title, and it bears no resemblance to actually what's in the national curriculum at all, or it's so surface that you're learning about a country, you're not learning geography per se. I think we've got to be really careful about the representation that we give of countries as well. If we're using Africa as a model to contrast life in the UK, we have to show, cities like Nairobi, which actually don't look so different from some cities that we have in the United Kingdom. And so we don't, keep on going along. We don't perpetuate that myth that, all of Africa is poor and things like that. And I think that's a really real careful thing that, we probably don't, generalizing massively here, so I'm sure it's not everyone, but certainly when I was in the classroom, it's not necessarily something I ever gave much thought to, and something that I think deserves a lot more thought.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's the more I read about geography, the more that becomes apparent, because you do have the way that people talk in the media in general terms about nations, and actually the reality is quite far. And as you said, it's much more complex. So I think those are.
I think just to expand quickly on that one, even problematic in what I said, and that you would compare the United Kingdom to Africa, because Africa is an entire continent. So actually, I apologize for that absolute rookie error, but actually, it's not thinking about Africa as this one big place. It's actually thinking, I'm sure it spans thousands of square miles, and the differences in climate is so different depending on how near the equator it is compared to like South Africa and the top parts of Morocco and Egypt. So it's more useful, I think, to actually hone in on a specific country within Africa, perhaps, than actually doing a massive comparison of Africa as a whole, because you can't possibly compare a whole continent to a tiny bit part of Europe and expect to get anything worthwhile.
Yeah, we had a whole discussion around that, our Key Stage 1 comparison, because we do the Amazon in year 2, and we had a whole discussion on what should the comparison be, because comparing the Amazon rainforest with London, it's a bit like, well, they're obviously going to be different because one's a rainforest and one's a city. So then we were sort of discussing, okay, do we compare Brazil with England? Or do we compare like the Amazon with a forest in the UK? So I think it's really thinking about that. And it's really careful thought. And I think that all comes back to subject knowledge, and that subject knowledge of the person who's planning the curriculum. And then also making sure that teachers understand why those decisions have been made, and that they have the knowledge as well. Like, what's the reason that we're doing that? And so that they know why does the curriculum say we're comparing the New Forest with the Amazon rainforest, rather than, well, we're comparing where we live with the Amazon rainforest? Like, really having in-depth reasoning behind those decisions and making sure everyone understands them.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think even if you were to compare the north of Argentina with the south of Argentina, because of the way it sits in South America, you get quite a different climate, and obviously that affects how the people are. And because of the conditions they're living in, I think perhaps more mountainous in the south. Don't quote me on that, but it changes your way of life and stuff. Yeah, so I totally understand that. And I'm thinking about my own practice. I was probably guilty of all those, being far too general.
Yeah, I'm sure I have been in the past. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Hard not to teach it in things in a stereotypical way. If you have to have the subject knowledge to not do that, don't you? Like, I'm sure that I used to do it, because if you haven't had the time to read up, and sometimes you don't know what you don't know either, do you? So really developing subject knowledge to avoid stereotypes needs a lot of time spent on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is that not knowing what you don't know, and it's only when you do realize, you're like, oh my goodness. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that sort of segues quite nicely into the next question. And so we're going to stick with our listeners. And what would you recommend to anyone wishing to develop their geographical prowess in terms of teaching? What should they read in terms of, for instance, books, papers, articles, blogs, perhaps even TV shows, like you said, The Ascent of Man, Neil? And what would you recommend for anyone thinking, I want to up my geographical game?
I think the first thing to do would be to, if you're not already, pester whoever's in charge of the purse strings to get a subscription to the Geographical Association. I think it's about £53, I think, for an institution. So it's really not a lot. A lot of their they've got some really good stuff on there. Some of the better stuff you then have to pay on top of. But you can get their collection. They call it In the Know. And it's 10 ebooks of just pure geographical factual information that covers Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. They have been written, obviously by people commissioned by the Geographical Association for the layman like us, or certainly like me anyway. And I know when I was looking at our school's curriculum, because when you go to, you can go to different websites, and different websites have different names for. So, I think I remember actually, what is the continent that Australia is on actually called? Is it Australia? Is it Australasia? Is it Oceania? Every website I went to, different. So I just thought, if the Geographical Association have put their name to this, I'm content in saying whatever they've said in this is what we'll go for. And that just means we can get that consistency then through that school. So as well, the names of the different climates, you go to website A, website B, they got different names for them. I bought this, and I think it costs, for the 10, it costs something like £20, I think it is. But for geographical knowledge, I think it is one of the best £20 you can buy. And it's all ebooks, so you just download them, put them on your server, and you are off to the races. Another great little book, one of Mark Hence's first one, was making every geography lesson count. It's written more from the perspective of secondary, but what it does is it looks at, if you're familiar with the Making Every Lesson Count series, it looks at the kind of the 6 principles of challenge, explanation, feedback, modeling, practice, and challenge. I think I said that already. And what they might look like in a geography classroom. But the part that I found most useful for me was that in one of the sections, Mark writes a model of what he would expect a year 7 pupil to give if they were doing a country comparison. And so for me as a year 6 teacher, I found that really valuable, just to give an idea of, this is something what the end point might start to look like. If we can get children starting to replicate something like this, then I know Mark Hensel will be happy. And so if he's happy about something geographically, then I'm going to be happy about it as well. And my final tidbit of wisdom would be to, if you haven't already, do go and look at Victoria's blogs on geography, because they are incredibly useful. And I know we joke about all things Victoria, but they really are exceptionally useful. And I learn a lot from reading them and still go back to them to this day. So definitely check those out.
I keep saying I'm going to update the Key Stage 2 geography one and then not doing it. Maybe I'll actually do that. Because I think I've learned a lot more since I originally wrote that geography one, yeah.
It's recorded now, so you have to
I'll have to do it.
Give the people what they want.
Well, when we're done, if I feel enthusiastic, maybe I'll do it this afternoon.
Exclusive.
Another book that is really good, and this one's good for subject knowledge, is this one, Teaching Primary Geography. And that's got subject knowledge for different areas of the curriculum. So there's like rivers, and it gives you the subject knowledge at the beginning of the chapter, and then some ideas of how to teach it as well. So that's a good one. And I guess I should recommend Powerful Geography since I'm in it. But this Powerful Geography is written, and it's aimed at all key stages, not just secondary. I haven't finished the whole thing yet, but it is relevant to primary as well. And I mean, a lot of I learnt a lot of my geography from just asking Mark Enzer questions on Twitter. So I'm sure that if people have questions, just ask the question on Twitter, and secondary geography people are quite happy to help. That's a lot of how I started learning a few things, and then I'd be thinking about it and just ask the question on Twitter.
Yeah, tapping into secondary geography colleagues has been extremely useful. And I've found the geographical department very willing to help out and chip in and stuff like that.
Nice. Yeah, because you've got people who have dedicated their lives to studying a subject, then to disseminating what they've learned to younger people. So I suppose not to ring fence anybody into year groups and stuff. So yeah, they're absolutely going to be on board with spreading the word as much as possible, aren't they? Which it probably makes it a little bit more shocking that there is this disconnect between the phases, because you've got people who are so passionate. And I think Twitter is a wonderful tool when used properly, because everyone just wants to share and chat and discuss. And are there any big ideas of conflict in geography? In maths you would have conversations about vocabulary and terminology. Just as you're mentioning, Neil. What are the climates called? What are the what is the name of the continent to the southeast of Asia?
I don't know if they have those kind of conflicts on their level. I just think it doesn't make life easier for the novice who wants to become more expert when they get these different. It happened in maths as well. I like the idea of things being codified, and it is as it is. And perhaps that's just because I like the certainty of all of that kind of thing. And when it's not, it irritates me, but it shouldn't irritate me. It's just one of those things. Why is there subject communities? Why are you not coming together to hammer these out and declare this is what we're going to call it from now on, and let that be that? And I think if they did that, perhaps it would help a lot. But also that with that, then you lose some of the nuance and the debate that goes about it, which I think can only be a good thing, really. I think when you get certainty, I think we probably strive then to stop, because we don't think we have anything more to go on. So knowing that there isn't that certainty actually means that we end up finding out more as well. But in terms of any big geographical arguments, I'm not entirely sure. I know Victoria's read the book, so she might have a few. Mark might mention a few. I don't know.
No, I don't. I mean, I think there's probably pet peeve misconceptions. But I don't know if I know any conflict as such, but I'm just thinking about the misconception that countries near the equator are hotter because they're closer to the sun.
Yeah.
Rather than they get more direct sunlight. I know that one. I think Mark's mentioned that in the talk a few times.
Yeah. I think he also mentions children coming up and thinking the source of a river is the sea.
Right, yeah.
I think he's mentioned that one. And I think he mentions, it was at a research ed, and I think you actually had to chime in to give an answer. Was it all mountains are volcanoes, or all volcanoes are mountains?
That was the Surrey one. And
was it the Surrey one? Yeah.
I think Claire was involved, and then Claire said something, and I correct her? I think, yeah, I remember that, yeah. And I think there's a thing between geography and values. So like not trying to get too much into value laden, like looking at climate change, but not trying to influence children's beliefs on, not sort of looking too much. There's a word that I'm not getting. What am I trying to say?
It's just making sure, I think, it stays in that discipline, isn't it? That it doesn't, it stays geography and it doesn't quickly become citizenship.
Yeah, and it's not going too much, into moral education, away from the actual geography around those issues, yeah.
Yeah, I imagine that's a very easy trap to fall into. And the Geography Association signed a bargain.
Yeah.
50 odd pounds. Wow. That's
I think it's £53 if you want an individual membership, or £53 for an institution. I think when I looked at it yesterday.
Nice.
As I say, some of the resources then are pay for afterwards, but I know there's plenty of free stuff on there as well that I've definitely used and borrowed.
Yeah, well, I've seen schools spend a whole lot more on stuff half as good. So I would
Yeah,
be very silly
and
not to be a
yeah,
member.
they have their own they have their own scheme there as well. You have to, again, it's an extra, you have to pay for it. And I don't know the quality of that, but if someone wanted something to start off their geographical journey, that, is not going to be Twinkle or a third party publisher who's going for a generic, they are the subject specialists. And I can't imagine you'd go too far wrong with using that as your foundation.
I think it's quite useful looking at some of their lesson plans because like when I plan geography, I'm approaching it more from like the knowledge point of view, I suppose, and it's good looking at how would a natural geography specialist approach teaching that topic, and just the way they've planned their lessons. It's good to look for ideas anyway, and to think about different ways of teaching the lessons. And
yeah,
I think I often go for the most direct and literal way of doing things, just naturally. So it's good to look at maybe a different, like thinking outside the box, how to approach a topic. To look at I think I don't have a membership, but I've just looked at their free stuff. There's a Rivers scheme of work on there. That's quite interesting to look at for ideas.
Definitely worth it. And I do think there's no excuse why schools aren't members of all the subject associations. I really don't think. There is something there for everything, and individuals are very likely to listen to what you have to say. I've had conversations with numerous people from different subject associations telling them, I'm not happy about this, or one of the issues I do have is that they do split the memberships into primary and they do split it into secondary. And some of the more meaty things that I like to get nerdy about, like the big geographical ideas and concepts like that, are behind the paywall for the secondary thing. And it's like, but a quick email being like, look, I'm really interested in this. Can you please, 9 times out of 10, they'll very helpful.
Nice. That's solid inside info. And so in terms of subject knowledge, what are your top 3 sources of rich geographical knowledge? And I know you've already touched on that a little bit, Victoria, with your first book recommendation. But where would you go for subject knowledge?
A lot of mine comes from just reading children's non-fiction books. And I will read loads of non-fiction books about whatever topic I'm doing, and then sort of follow it up myself with questions. And then that's where I'll question people on Twitter just to make sure that I know the right thing and I've understood it. But a lot of it does come from, I just look at loads of non-fiction books, look at lots of different examples.
Yeah, I think DK are such a underrated website to use for subject knowledge for some things. Some of their stuff is really, really, really good. I certainly enjoy, the In the Know from the Geographical Association is, first class and outstanding. The Royal Geographical Society, which is different to the Geographical Association, they have some really, really good stuff, plenty of lesson plans and in-depth articles, etc. on there. Really, really good. And you can't go wrong with National Geographic magazine, or there's National Geographic Kids as well. Yeah. Both of those things are really, really useful.
I should do my plug for Epic. I love Epic, but if you use Epic for reading, they've got lots of National Geographic Kids books on there and other really good non-fiction books. And then that's great at the moment in lockdown as well. Like every time I start a new topic, I set my children a new collection of books to read linked to whatever we're learning. And also when you're in school, then it just means they can all have a copy of the same non-fiction book. So you can show them on the board, but if you've got devices, they can actually have their own copies to look at for reading as well. So that's been great for me, but also for using with the children this year.
Nice. That sounds awesome. You had to give me a link for that so I can stick it in the show notes, because I'm definitely going to investigate that further. So I think moving on slightly, what are the features of a high quality geography curriculum?
I think we've probably covered most of it in other questions. Like for me, the main thing is probably the logic. You want to see logic in the sequencing of the curriculum, just to think, it is the sense of, does it make sense to teach that after that, or what year group does it fit into to link with the science? I think that's what I would look at if I was looking at a curriculum. It's just, the big picture would be, does it make sense? Where's the logic behind it? Can you work out the reasoning why things have been planned in that way? Looking at, is it going to actually have, I would look and think, okay, but if the children learn that in that way, is it going to have the outcome you want, which is at the end of Key Stage 2? They know all the stuff in the primary geography curriculum. Like, how likely is it that they will get this from the planning? So we've probably discussed lots of details about that before. That's probably what I would be looking for.
Nice. Yeah, I think I've just written down 7 little bullet points here. So going to what Victoria said, well sequenced, and everything that Victoria mentioned about how it all fits together and all comes together. The links between everything is clear, and there's a real purpose. If not that we do anything for Ofsted, but if you do ask those questions, why this, why then, someone can answer a question. And I think the hardest thing that I find supporting schools is that someone else's reasons to why this, why then may be different to mine, but that's perfectly okay and acceptable, as long as they can provide that reasoning for that. Might challenge it just because, that's what I'm there to do, but as long as they can provide an answer for it, then, and it's a high quality answer, then that's not a problem at all. I think resource rich is a really important one for geography. I do think the fact that you can go through a school and kids haven't seen a globe, or there isn't a world map in the classroom because the topic board has to go there or whatever, kind of no space has been made for that, a large, meaty, chunky world map, which, it's there in September and it's blank. And by the time you get through to July, things have been added to it. There's Post-it notes all over it. There's string coming out from all over it, linking things to that they've done. I think one of those is really great. But again, just making sure that you have the resources to go and, teach geography really, really well. I think as well, a high quality geography curriculum could go beyond curriculum. And I can imagine it would be bad geography, but you could probably teach the curriculum as a whole you could probably do like a drop down week. And if you dedicated a whole week in Key Stage 1 and a whole week in just one year group in Key Stage 2, you probably could teach it. You could teach it all. They wouldn't learn it all, but they could teach it all. And there are, I think, some big omissions from the national curriculum. For example, it's not kind of expected that Key Stage in Key Stage 1 or 2, Africa is looked at. I know that does go on to mention it in Key Stage 3, but I think there's certainly no harm to going beyond that and looking at Africa. I think it's actually quite important that in primary school they get, a little bit of breadth and depth in everything, in as much as possible. This one goes back to what Victoria said, that opportunities to revisit prior learned content, which goes back to the sequencing aspects, right? Little and often, where can we drop in things? If we've studied rivers in Spain, then when I do North America, it probably makes sense to look at the Mississippi and various other rivers or whatever it might be. Not to say that it's going to take up all your time, but it's just there to add to that other anchor to extend that schema of what river is. I think quite important as well is that it tries to take students out of their lived experience. I absolutely agree that we start with what the students know and have, but the end point is for them to realize that there is some things bigger than them out there, and that, whether they like it or not, they are part of this interconnected world, and the role that they do play in it is important, and it will kind of have that butterfly ripple effect and affect different things in different ways. They get that understanding of, where we are in the world and how we got there, my scent of man moment. But also I think they know what geography isn't as well. Kind of be what I would pick as my high features of a high quality geography curriculum.
Making use of the local area and the field work as well, and using trips and visits, and really incorporating that into everything else is really important as well.
Something that comes across really clearly is how carefully you're thinking, both of you, about the decisions you make, and how geography looks in your schools comes to be. There are no half measures, really, are there? It's a case of, this is worthy of our time. Let's put the groundwork in, and then the children will flourish as a result. Yes, and really fascinating. And like I say, I wish I was teaching geography tomorrow. So your work has inspired many teachers, and I think will continue to do so for a long time. But where do you draw your inspiration from?
I found this question the hardest.
Oh, I've got loads. Can I go first?
You go first, then. I can just say.
Read loads of stuff down for this one. I think mainly it's from the children, that I just look at the children and what they know, and I want them to know as much as they can. So a lot of it is just the children, and also other teachers at school, and just think like everyone's got different ways of approaching things. And I think probably more general things on curriculum design, obviously Claire's work on curriculum design, Claire Seeley, has a massive influence on, she obviously had a massive influence on our school, but also just me generally before I actually worked at the school, that her blogs and just thinking how do they apply to geography was a big influence. And also when I've worked with other schools as well, like that's so useful. I always think of new ways of developing my school's geography curriculum when I've gone to work with another school, and I think, oh, actually, now I've done that at that school, I want us to do something like that as well, and I want to alter it a little bit. So working with other schools and talking to teachers from different schools, always really interesting to just see different ways of approaching things. Yeah, okay, I'm going to stop there. You can go. Because I'm going to ramble. I ramble on a bit more, but it might not be very interesting.
Ramble away. I think there's been definitely some secondary colleagues from Twitter that I definitely kind of draw some inspiration from, particularly Mark Enser, Michael Childs, and David Rogers. They both, all three of those have made me really reconsider primary geography. And even looking through Mark's recent book, there's still some areas where I'm, I still have a lot of work to do as well as to what good geography can look like. Maybe he's been a bit ambitious what he expects by the end of Key Stage 2, perhaps. But I think, you got to have that ambition, you've got to have that high expectation, and we've got to see, it's worth seeing if it can work, absolutely. Again, general curriculum design principles and really kind of understanding how it all works together, how we can pull it up so that we can give children, their best start in life has certainly kind of been my, my inspiration for this. And it's one of those things where I can start off, not, as I say, I similar to Victoria, actually, I dropped geography in year 9 as soon as I could. I never really gave it much thought until I had to start teaching it. Didn't particularly enjoy teaching it, and I'm sure what the quality that I was providing wasn't great. And then, cognitive science and how everything kind of fits together. It's just, it's like a nice big puzzle, isn't it? And we like, as a species, we like solving puzzles, and it's a puzzle I'm determined to kind of solve, for, not just for myself, but if anyone else finds the answers that I seem to be providing useful and it helps people, then, brilliant.
Excellent, wonderful answers. And I know for certain that people do find what you guys have contributed, extremely useful. And and I mean it when I say they will continue to do so for a long time. So I suppose then, last thing to ask is there any final advice, for teachers who are now feeling energized, like me, and ready to up their geography game? Victoria, have you anything else that you think, I must say this before the end?
I think I probably just want to repeat what Neil said right at the beginning about when you're reading the national curriculum, really read the beginning, the description of what geography is. Like, read that introduction to the national curriculum first, and start from there. And then I think maybe probably just enjoy learning about geography yourself. I've just found it so interesting, and every time I find something else out, it seems to lead to more and more things. And I think if you just enjoy finding things out for yourself, then that will have a big impact on the quality of your geography teaching.
Excellent. Neil, any final words of advice?
We're far from, the final word on anything geography, but I'm sure Victoria and I are happy to help out any way that we can over Twitter, and that's not me kind of drum up any business for anything. Well, we don't have a consultancy at all, so it would just be us giving our free time. Which, we're happy.
I'm not making any money out of it, but I actually can drum up business for. I will help schools. Yes.
Yeah. So we're doing it because we want kids to have a good experience of geography, not because we're looking to line our own pockets. Pester SLT as much as you can to make sure you get that GA membership. I'd say definitely do that. It's a marathon and not a sprint. You're not going to get it right the first time, nor should you expect to get it right the first time. And if you think you have got it right the first time, I can probably guarantee you that you haven't got it right. So, take your time with it. Its curriculum is never done. It's never finished. It's always got to go through that process of checking and refining. And as much as I don't want this, because I know if he does listen, Mark Henser will jump on it too much, but buy some of Mark Henser's books. And I'll say they're all right because he does enough to advertise himself.
Super.
But yeah, those would be my top ones. Oh, and obviously, go to Victoria because she's got some really interesting ideas on. She mentioned field trips earlier, and her idea of when you should do field work and when you should go on trips to be part of your curriculum offering is, quite interesting and different to the way I think most schools go about doing their trips. So definitely go and check out her blog on how that should work.
Excellent. So then the last thing, as always, is the tier list. Your tier list will have a geography theme. It will be the 7 continents of the world, and we are, in your opinion, judging them against their utility or their importance with respect to the English national curriculum. And obviously it's completely subjective. There are multiple answers, and I suppose the hard part will be between the both of you agreeing on where each of them go. Victoria, this is your first time with a tier list. I'm just going to explain. S is your highest tier, your God tier. This is extremely fundamentally important. And then A is still a very good item, B is about average, and C is below average, or in this case, not very important at all. And so the first is North America. What do you guys reckon?
And I guess that has to go in S, doesn't it? Because, well, you can choose between North or South America, but it is one of the ones that the national curriculum says you have to cover.
One of the ones, isn't it?
Yeah. So S or A?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think if there's any other utility besides that it's just on the... I think I would go A, because I think you can probably do more with South America than you could do with North America in terms of how you could link it to... I'm thinking particularly, Darwin and Wallace and the evolution topic in science, which just links up so beautifully and so wonderfully. So I would say A. I'm happy with A. If you are, Victoria.
Yeah.
Excellent. That was very diplomatic from both of you. Next one is South America.
I think we're happy with, well, I'd certainly go for S. Lots of interesting things that you can look at. It's got every geographical feature that you want to look at, links to other areas of the curriculum, Amazon rainforest, which gets, it's always, it's like a prototype for primary geography. I would go S, I think, for that one.
No, I'm just thinking, like, I agree, but then I'm just trying to think a bit more about, like, why do I think South America is more important than North America? But my instinct would have been, yes, I'd choose South America first. And then I'm thinking, if you had to pick one, I guess you'd go with South America first, wouldn't you? Yeah, if you had to pick.
I think a teacher who perhaps didn't read much up on geography would get more out of it for their children if they chose to do South America over North America without much additional wider reading, perhaps.
Yes.
So I think that's maybe why I go S over A for South America compared to North America.
Yeah.
Like I say, it's totally subjective, and if it's just something you feel, and you can feel it's important, that's fine. As an aside, the sheer scale of South America really freaks me out because I have no way of, I know people in Venezuela and Colombia, and when they describe the journey to the coast, you're talking, 4 or 5 hours from somewhere that looks really close on a map, but actually is quite I just can't get my head around the sheer scale of some of these land masses. I think being from Ireland and it being a particularly small land mass, scale is something I struggle with.
Hopefully this will improve South American listenership as well now.
Yeah, we'll have to cut that bit especially. And then we have Europe.
That was good, hasn't it?
Were you going for Victoria S?
Yeah. Isn't that the only one? I mean, you have to cover it, so it's got to be S, doesn't it? That's the one that's actually specified that you have to cover in the national curriculum. So, apart from the fact that we live as well.
Yeah, I think for those reasons you have to. And I think as well, with the whole Brexit thing, when that was all happening, loads of children actually thought we were physically leaving the continent of Europe and that somehow we would be doing some sort of weird jump. So, we'd be more towards the middle of the Atlantic as well. So I think getting them to understand, not necessarily understand, just making that distinction between Europe as the continent and the European Union as a political union is, quite an important jump in understanding for them.
Yeah, and I mean links to history as well, just like the Romans and Greeks. And I think just the variety that, and I'm sure there is that variety in other continents actually, but I suppose it's more because it's closer to us. The variety of climates you can still have just within Europe is huge, isn't it? So.
Yeah, excellent. Good stuff. And then we've got Africa.
I'm thinking obviously it's not one that's mentioned explicitly in the primary curriculum. I think it's worth doing if you're going to invest the time to do it right. And so that leaves me with hovering it between A or B. Because I think doing it wrong will cause more harm than deciding not to teach it at all. Because obviously you have got links to other parts of the curriculum. I know we look at, obviously there's the Egyptians, we look at when we do it we look at geography in year 2, I think it is, and we look at Kenya, specifically a city in Kenya. So we look at Nairobi, and so we kind of make sure that we don't fall into that trap of all Africa is poor. And look, in Nairobi, they do actually have buildings made out of, concrete and glass and skyscrapers and all of that kind of thing. I'm going...
Like how much depth you're talking about looking at,
yeah.
Wasn't it really? I think it's really important for children to have an overview of Africa as a continent and the variety and understanding. Yeah. But whether
my heart says A, but my gut says B. What does yours say, Victoria?
Yeah, I think I'm probably the same.
So we're going to listen to our hearts, we're going to listen to our guts.
Do you want me to put it
I'm going to go
in between?
Are we allowed to do that?
Yeah, I suppose it's a time factor that's stopping. Like if I wasn't thinking of time factors of what could people realistically cover, I'd just put it in A. But you can't cover everything you might want to cover if you're actually thinking practically. What would you include in your curriculum? You might not
exactly. And if your way into it was like, oh, we're doing The Lion King, like that's our topic title. Like, no, like cut it. Like, don't bother at all. Like, you're not going to get anything valuable from that whatsoever. Yeah, okay, I'm happy with A/B if that's allowed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a visual representation of what you guys have explained. And then we've got Asia. Where would you put Asia?
Maybe the same.
Same.
Because although it doesn't specifically mention Asia in the national curriculum, when you're looking at a lot of the physical features, I mean, you'd end up like perceiving a look at the Himalayas when you do mountains, things like that. But I always end up teaching children things about Asia, even if it's not explicitly a unit in my curriculum in that year. I always end up including it. This year I've done stuff on Japan and Nepal already, just incidentally linked to other countries. So
yeah, and my gut says obviously if you're doing the Shang dynasty in your history, your non-European civilization, then I think could go into the fully deserve the A bracket with that kind of asterisk next to it. Also really interesting, obviously you have Russia itself as a country which spans the 2 continents. So that as a point of reference is quite interesting. So I think, when we silo things off into the continents, etc., I think children can kind of quite see, there's this clear definitive line where one country, it's almost like done on, they draw their lines on the political maps as opposed to actually looking at the plates and stuff, which more make up the continents. I think, for me, if you were doing the Shang dynasty for your history unit, I'd go for A. So I guess if you're not, then the most logical place for it is that AB AB line.
So you're both happy with in the middle again?
yeah,
The really good reasons for that. Let's try and make them reasonably simple. And then, obviously an important one. It says Australia here. Neil, what is the official title of this?
We use Australia in our curriculum to refer to the country and the continent of New Zealand and the islands as well.
Yeah, because it seems to be the more recently Australia will be used, but I remember being at school and it being Oceania, Australia.
Yeah.
But it seems like more recently that Australia has been the term. What do you reckon? Does it get covered much in primary school in England?
No, not at all, really.
Really? As actually a country to do a depth study on an area in that continent, I wouldn't say you would.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you could, but I wouldn't think it'd be the highest leverage thing that you could do to draw out natural links between other areas. I think if you had some freedoms, it'd be really interesting, because obviously you could do the whole deportation and the gold rush, and obviously there are some pertinent issues about migration and invasion that you can obviously look at, and the way that the indigenous people were horrifically treated by imperial empire, the English Empire, the British Empire, and things like that. But so I think that if you're an academy and you have those freedoms, I guess you could say it was a solid B perhaps. But if you're an LA school where you don't have those freedoms, C. So I guess that B, for me, that B, because obviously the listenership, we don't know who it is, that BC point I think would make the most sense.
Yeah, to me, I'd briefly touch on it, like when I did rivers. And then we were doing rocks and soils, so we were looking at landforms. We briefly looked at some features of Australia. I think they were actually just in Australia, the country, but we briefly looked at some physical features. But I can't see doing an actual study of it over any other continents.
Yeah.
We certainly include it in the quote unquote pub quiz part of it, what is the capital of Australia, because everyone always says it's Sydney, when it's obviously not. We look at the highest mountain, the longest river, and that kind of thing, but nothing kind of more than that. That's kind of era, by the way, in case people thought I was dodging out of actually not knowing what the capital of Australia was. I knew enough that it wasn't Sydney, but not enough to know what it actually was. I'm aware. Yeah,
because that's the way some people who we know would have interpreted it as an opportunity to say that. And I think there's simply not enough time to study the whole world primary, and so I think it's fair.
No.
And then the last one is Antarctica.
Well, see, that one you would definitely, because Key Stage 1 have to learn about the hot and cold areas of the world. So you'd definitely do something on it at Key Stage 1. I don't know what that means about where we put it.
What does your gut say? What do you think? Is this important? I suppose it does sound important.
Yeah, I think it's important. It's just that you would do it, but you wouldn't spend as much time on it. But I think you have to look at it, don't you? You have to look at the polar climates.
Are you opting out of this one, Neil?
No, I'm really interested to what Victoria has to say, because I reckon this could be one that we might profoundly disagree on.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we do a unit on Antarctica in year 6. And we go really in depth in it, and planning it was really, really fascinating. And we link that up with, so we look at the idea of like tourism as well, and what, so she kind of get rid of that idea, people only visit hot, warm places, and how, and the tourism in Antarctica has increased over time, and actually how that's impacted the climate and things like that in Antarctica. And then we combine that with an explorer's topics. Then we do a bit of history with Scott and Admonson and the kind of the race to the South Pole and all of that kind of stuff. So I've personally, when having to do that, I found it really fascinating. So for me, it's and as Victoria says, it's not, you do then look at that extends their understanding at Key Stage 1 as well. having done that. So for me, and obviously there's a lot, the idea we do send, it's the one continent where the people don't live all year round, but we'll send scientists off every, kind of 6 months to live there and do experiments and stuff like that. So I think it's got some utility that way. So for me, I'd put it in A.
Yeah.
Excellent. So just to recap then, we've got S, South America and Europe. A, North America and Antarctica. A/B, Africa and Asia. And then B/C, Australia. And obviously you guys have explained really well the context behind those decisions. You happy enough with how the tier looks?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm still just not quite comfortable on South America and North America. South America being, I don't know.
Yes.
I get why I would probably pick South America over North America, but maybe it's just the idea of saying that South America is more important that I'm not quite.
It's been a real pleasure talking to you guys today. Thank you very much for sharing your time and expertise. And obviously we'll see you next week when we go into history in the same depth that we've gone into geography. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank
No
you.
problem. Thank you very much.